He had everything: money, power, respect, and a mansion where nothing escaped his control. But something changed when he realized that his most loyal employee was hiding a deep secret. Driven by suspicion, he decided to follow her and witnessed a scene that broke him inside. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. Carmen Santos slid the damp cloth over the marble of the living room with mechanical movements, but her hands trembled like leaves in the wind. Robert Anderson watched those fingers he had known for 5 years, always steady and precise, now faltering like those of a frightened child. Something was wrong. The 42-year-old executive hadn't gotten where he was by ignoring details. Every suspicious movement, every change in behavior, every hesitation had a reason. And Carmen, his most trusted employee, had been different for weeks. Very different. She, who always greeted him with a respectful nod, now avoided his eyes. Who always finished her tasks calmly, now rushed as if chased by ghosts. Who never answered her phone during work, now whispered quick conversations hidden in the bathrooms, always with the same desperate expression on her face. Robert closed the laptop where he was reviewing contracts and rose from the leather armchair. His footsteps echoed on the floor of the Scarsdale mansion, each sound amplified by the tense silence Carmen carried with her. The 38-year-old woman flinched when she heard him approach, as if expecting a reprimand. "Carmen," he said, watching how she shuddered at the sound of her own name. "Do you need to leave early today?" The simple question provoked a reaction that surprised him. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. She tried to hold back, biting her lower lip hard enough to turn it red. Her hands squeezed the cleaning cloth with such intensity that her knuckles turned white. "No, Mr. Anderson," she replied in a choked voice, forcing a smile so fake it hurt. "I can finish everything today. I don't need to leave." A lie. Robert could spot a lie from a mile away. Years of running a logistics company had taught him to read people, like open books. And Carmen was lying blatantly with a desperation that bordered on panic. "Are you sure?" he insisted, crossing his arms. "You seem tired." Carmen swallowed hard and lowered her eyes. "I'm fine, sir. Just a little cold." Another lie. Robert observed the woman who had cleaned his house with dedication for 5 years without ever giving him a reason to be suspicious. Carmen had always been punctual, efficient, almost invisible in the way she performed her tasks. She arrived at 8 in the morning and left at 5 in the afternoon, always keeping the same hours, always, with the same professional demeanor. But in the last 3 weeks, everything had changed. She would arrive breathless, as if she had run to avoid being late. During the day, she constantly glanced at the kitchen wall clock, and when it was time to go home, she practically flew out the door, leaving behind only the smell of detergent and a strange feeling in the air. "Carmen," Robert said more firmly, "if you need anything." "I don't need anything," she shot back, too quickly, too loudly. Realizing her altered tone, she immediately corrected herself, lowering her voice. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to. I'm really fine. I can keep working." Her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. Carmen glanced quickly at Robert, as if asking for permission, and when he nodded, she answered with trembling hands. "Hello?" she whispered, turning slightly. "No, I'm still—" "Yes, I know what time it is. Please, just another half hour." The voice on the other end of the line was female, older, and seemed impatient. Robert managed to catch fragments of the conversation. "Can't stay much longer. And you promised that?" Carmen hung up with abrupt movements, putting the phone away as if it were burning her hands. When she turned around, 2 tears were streaming down her cheeks, which she tried to wipe away discreetly with the back of her hand. "I need to finish the kitchen," she murmured, walking past Robert without looking at him. He followed her with his eyes as she walked away, noticing how her shoulders trembled under the simple blue uniform. Carmen moved through the kitchen like a malfunctioning robot, wiping the same countertop 3 times in a row, checking the clock every few seconds. Robert stood at the kitchen entrance watching. Carmen didn't notice his presence, as she gripped the sink with both hands, taking deep breaths as if trying to calm herself. He saw her look at the clock one more time and whisper something that sounded like a desperate prayer. "Oh God, please help me." The vulnerability in that voice hit Robert like a punch to the gut. In 5 years, he had never seen Carmen show any emotion other than respectful professionalism. She was like an efficient shadow, always present, but never intrusive. And now here she was, falling apart before his eyes. Robert's executive instincts kicked in. Something was happening. Something serious. Enough to turn his most stable employee into a bundle of nerves, and he needed to find out what it was. When Carmen finally turned and saw Robert standing there, her expression shut down like a curtain being pulled. She straightened her shoulders, quickly wiped her eyes and forced that painful smile again. "I'm finished, Mr. Anderson," she said in a controlled voice. "May I go now?" It was only 4:30 in the afternoon. Carmen never asked to leave early. Never. "Of course," he replied, but there was something in his tone that made Carmen hesitate. "See you tomorrow." She gathered her things with careless haste, putting the cleaning supplies away haphazardly in the utility closet. Normally, Carmen organized everything with military precision. Today, she just threw things into the closet and shut the door. Robert followed her discreetly to the back exit of the mansion. Carmen practically ran through the garden, went through the staff gate, and disappeared down the street with hurried steps. Even from a distance, he could see how she nervously looked from side to side, as if expecting to be followed. The uneasy feeling in Robert's chest intensified. In 30 years of building businesses, he had developed a keen instinct for problems, and all his internal alarms were blaring. He went back inside the mansion but couldn't concentrate on anything else. The words of the contracts blurred in his mind as he thought about the panicked look on Carmen's face, the way her hands trembled, the whispered call she had received. At 6 o'clock, he called his personal driver and security, Bruno Diaz. "I need you to do me a favor tomorrow," he told his trusted man. "Something discreet." On the other end of the line, Bruno waited in silence. Robert hesitated for a moment, questioning his own motives. Was he being paranoid, intrusive, or just cautious? "I want you to follow Carmen when she leaves here, just to see where she goes." "Any problem, boss?" Bruno asked. "I don't know yet," Robert replied, looking out the window at the empty street where Carmen had disappeared. "But I'm going to find out." The next morning, Robert could barely focus on his meetings. While discussing export contracts with Japanese clients, his mind was fixed on the desperate expression he had seen on Carmen's face. Every time he checked the clock, a growing anxiety took hold of him. Carmen arrived promptly at 8 o'clock as always. Robert watched discreetly from his office window as she crossed the garden with hurried steps. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she looked around like a cornered animal. Throughout the morning, he made excuses to walk through the rooms where she was working. Carmen cleaned with mechanical efficiency, but Robert noticed details that had previously gone unnoticed. She checked her phone obsessively, always hiding the screen when someone approached. Her hands trembled more than the day before, and there was something new. Dark, circles under her eyes as if she hadn't slept. At 2 in the afternoon, Bruno arrived discreetly through the back of the property. The 50-year-old former cop had worked for Robert for the past 8 years, first as personal security, then also taking on duties as a driver, and occasionally discreet investigations for the company. "Is she still here?" Bruno asked in a low voice when they met in the backyard. "Yes, but she's been leaving early lately. Stay sharp." Robert hesitated before continuing. "Bruno, if she's in some kind of trouble—" "I get it, boss. I'll just observe and report." At 4:15, Carmen put away the cleaning supplies with the same careless haste as the day before. Robert watched from his office window as she practically ran to the staff exit, carrying a small bag he had never noticed before. Bruno was waiting in his car 2 blocks away with a view of the exit. Through a two-way radio, he kept Robert informed of Carmen's movements. "She's walking fast down Maple Avenue," Bruno's voice came through clearly. "Keeps looking over her shoulder like she's being followed." Robert felt his stomach tighten. "Keep on her, and Bruno, maintain a good distance." Carmen walked for 15 minutes to the Scarsdale train station. Bruno followed her by car, always staying 2 or 3 streets behind. At the station, she boarded a train headed for the city, forcing Bruno to abandon his car and follow her on foot. "I'm in the same car, 3 seats behind her," Bruno reported on his cell phone, pretending to read a newspaper. "She won't stop looking at her watch, seems extremely agitated." "Where are you guys headed?" "Train's going to Grand Central. She seems to know the route well." During the 40-minute trip, Carmen remained as tense as a guitar string about to snap. Bruno watched as she whispered what seemed to be prayers, as her legs bounced nervously, as her eyes filled with tears that she quickly wiped away with the back of her hand. At Grand Central Terminal, Carmen got off hurriedly and headed for the bus stop. Bruno followed her, keeping a safe distance, communicating every move to Robert. "She boarded the BX-19 bus," Bruno said, running to get on the same vehicle, "heading to the South Bronx." The name of the neighborhood made Robert frown. The South Bronx was one of the poorest areas of New York City, about a 2-hour journey from his mansion in Scarsdale. Why would Carmen make such a long and complicated trip every day? The bus swayed through the congested city streets, while Carmen remained glued to the window, looking out anxiously. Bruno noticed how she clutched the small bag to her chest, as if protecting something precious. "We're getting to the South Bronx," Bruno informed him. "The neighborhood is a lot different from Scarsdale, boss." "Keep reporting everything." Carmen got off at a stop near a housing project of low-rise buildings painted in faded colors. The difference from the luxurious environment of Scarsdale was stark. Cracked sidewalks, kids playing among old cars, laundry hanging from apartment windows. But something surprising happened when Carmen set foot on those streets. Her posture changed completely. Her shoulders relaxed, her step became firmer, and for the first time in weeks, a genuine smile appeared on her face. "She seems different here," Bruno observed, keeping his distance. "More at ease." Carmen now walked with purpose, greeting neighbors who waved from their windows, stopping to chat briefly with an elderly woman selling churros on a corner. It was as if she had returned, home after a long exile. "Where is she going?" Robert asked, feeling the tension build in his chest. "Hold on." Bruno stopped abruptly behind a lamppost. She stopped in front of a small building. "There's a sign. It's a school, boss. PS 152, the Maria de Lourdes School." "A school?" "Yeah." She's waiting out front, looking at the entrance. Now she's checking her watch. It's 4:50. Robert felt a strange unease. Why would Carmen go to a school in the late afternoon? She had never mentioned having younger siblings or nieces or nephews. In 5 years of work, she had never spoken of any family at all. "Bruno, something's happening. Keep watching." Gradually, children began to leave the school. Carmen moved closer to the entrance, standing on her tiptoes to see better over the heads of the waiting parents. Her expression was one of pure anticipation, as if she were waiting for something very important. And then it happened. A small girl, about 7 years old, with curly hair tied in 2 messy buns and a wrinkled school uniform, came running out the school door. Her eyes quickly scanned the crowd of adults until they found Carmen. "Mommy!" the child shouted, running toward Carmen with her arms outstretched. Bruno felt the air leave his lungs. "Oh my God, what is it?" Robert asked, noticing the shocked tone in his employee's voice. "Boss, Carmen has a daughter. A little girl just ran into her arms yelling, 'Mommy!'" On the other end of the line, Robert was completely silent. Of all the possibilities he had considered, this was the last one on his mind. Carmen, his quiet and discreet employee, was a mother. "Keep telling me everything," he said in a choked voice. Bruno watched the scene unfold in front of this school. Carmen hugged her daughter with an intensity that was painful to see, as if she hadn't seen her in months instead of hours. The girl clung to her mother's neck, whispering something in her ear that made Carmen laugh for the first time in weeks. "She took something out of her bag," Bruno reported. "Looks like a snack, a roll. She's sharing it with the girl. They're both sitting on the curb eating together." Robert closed his eyes, trying to process the information. All of Carmen's strange behaviors took on a new meaning. The rush to leave work, the constant glances at the clock, the whispered phone conversations, the tears of despair. She was racing against time to pick up her daughter from school. "They're getting up," Bruno continued, "walking together. The girl is telling Carmen something excitedly. She's smiling, boss. For the first time since I've known her, Carmen looks genuinely happy." The two walked through streets with cracked pavement until they reached a simple apartment complex. Bruno followed them from a distance, observing how Carmen held her daughter's hand tightly, how she stopped to steady her when she stumbled, how she bent down to wipe a smudge off the child's clothes. They went into a ground-floor apartment, Bruno informed him. "Old building, very simple. Carmen turned on the living room light. I can see through the window. The apartment is small, but it looks tidy." Robert remained silent, trying to organize his thoughts. In 5 years, Carmen had never mentioned having a daughter. She had never asked for time off for school events, never arrived late because of a child's issue, never spoken of extra expenses or the difficulties of being a single mother. Why did she hide this? He murmured more to himself than to Bruno. Through the window, Bruno could see Carmen helping her daughter with what looked like homework. The girl was sitting at a small table, while Carmen moved around the apartment, probably preparing dinner. The domestic scene contrasted sharply with the image of the nervous, mysterious employee they had followed there. "Boss," Bruno said softly, "there's something you should know. The apartment. It's very simple. Really simple. And Carmen seems to be raising the girl alone." "How do you know she's alone?" "No signs of a man, just women's and children's clothes on the fire escape, and from the way Carmen acts, she's carrying all the responsibility herself." The revelation hit Robert like a lightning bolt. Carmen had not only hidden that she had a daughter, she was raising the child alone, traveling more than 2 hours each way between Scarsdale and the South Bronx, holding down a job to support them both, without ever asking for help or revealing her struggles. "Bruno, come on back. I need to think." But when he hung up the phone, Robert couldn't move from his office armchair. The image of Carmen running desperately to pick up her daughter from school, sharing a simple roll on the sidewalk, smiling genuinely for the first time in weeks, was seared into his mind. And with that image came a question that tormented him all night. What kind of boss was he that an employee felt the need to hide something as fundamental as having a child? Robert spent the entire night without sleeping. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the image of Carmen sharing a roll with her daughter on the school sidewalk. The simplicity of that gesture carried a weight he couldn't fully comprehend, but it bothered him deeply. The next morning he watched Carmen arrive with new eyes. He noticed how she seemed more tired than usual, how her clothes were slightly wrinkled, how there was a small stain on the sleeve of her uniform that she tried to hide. Details that had previously gone unnoticed now screamed at him. Carmen moved through the house as always, but Robert noticed she checked her phone more frequently, her expression growing more tense with each glance at the screen. Around 10 in the morning, he heard her whispering on the phone in the service bathroom. "No, Mrs. Davis, I understand you need to leave. Yes, I know it's only a 15-minute delay. Hi, please, just for today." Carmen's voice trembled with a plea Robert had never heard before. When she hung up, she leaned against the wall for a few seconds, breathing deeply as if trying to compose herself. Robert moved away before she came out of the bathroom, but the conversation echoed in his mind. Who was Mrs. Davis, and why was Carmen begging for 15 minutes? During lunch, he called Bruno. "I need you to do another observation this afternoon," he said, feeling like a spy but unable to ignore the curiosity consuming him. "But this time I want you to get to the school earlier. I want to understand the whole routine." "Got it, boss. What time should I be there?" 4 o'clock. And Bruno, try to find out who takes care of the girl before Carmen gets there." At 2 in the afternoon, Carmen put away her cleaning supplies with the same haste as always, but this time Robert noticed something different. She checked 3 times to make sure all the faucets were turned off, double-checked that the windows were locked, and glanced nervously at the clock as if every second was precious. "Mr. Anderson," she said hesitantly, standing at the kitchen door, Can I leave 5 minutes early today?" It was the first time in 5 years Carmen had asked for anything. Robert was so surprised it took him a few seconds to respond. "Of course, is there a problem?" Carmen's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked back. "No, sir. Thank you. She left running, literally running, leaving Robert even more intrigued. Bruno arrived at the school at 4 o'clock and positioned himself strategically in a nearby coffee shop from where he could observe all the activity. What he saw surprised him. "Boss," he reported over the phone, "there's an elderly woman sitting in front of the school. She's watching a few kids, including Carmen's daughter. Seems to be some kind of informal babysitter." "Keep watching." Through the coffee shop window, Bruno could see the dynamic unfolding. The woman, who must have been around 70, was looking after 6 or 7 children whose parents hadn't arrived yet. She handed out cookies from a plastic bag, helped with homework, and kept the kids organized in a shady area. "Carmen's daughter is there, but she looks anxious," Bruno continued. "She keeps looking down the street as if expecting someone." At 4:40, Carmen appeared, running down the street. Even from a distance, Bruno could see her expression of relief when she spotted her daughter. But there was something else. Carmen looked like she had been crying on the way. Her eyes were red and swollen. "The old woman is talking to Carmen," Bruno reported. "Looks like a serious conversation. Carmen is nodding like she's apologizing." Robert heard fragments of the conversation through the phone, as Bruno had turned up the volume to catch it better. "I can't do it anymore. Honey, my grandkids need me too. I understand, Mrs. Davis, but please, $15 a day isn't worth the work and the responsibility. I can try to make it 20. It's not just about the money, Carmen. I'm just too tired." Bruno saw Carmen run a hand over her forehead in a gesture of desperation he recognized. "Boss, I think the babysitter is quitting. Carmen looks desperate." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Carmen visibly pleading and the woman shaking her head no. Finally, Mrs. Davis stood up, kissed Carmen's daughter on the forehead, and walked away. Slowly, Carmen stood there holding her daughter's hand, staring into space with an expression of complete desolation. Bruno's heart ached seeing that strong woman fall apart in front of the school. "The girl is trying to comfort her mom," he whispered into the phone. "She's wiping the tears from Carmen's face." It was a heartbreaking image, a 7-year-old child trying to comfort a mother who was clearly at her breaking point. Carmen knelt down to her daughter's level and spoke to her for a few minutes. Bruno couldn't hear the words, but he saw the girl nod gravely as if she understood a situation far too complex for her age. They walked home more slowly than the day before. Carmen carried a plastic bag with some fruit and a loaf of bread, and Bruno noticed how she constantly checked the money in her pocket, counting and recounting the bills. In the apartment, Carmen sat her daughter down to do homework, while she herself moved through the apartment like a hurricane. She washed dishes, swept the floor, folded clothes, cooked something simple on the old stove all at once, as if trying to make up for the time lost talking to Mrs. Davis. "Boss," Bruno said softly, "you need to see this. Carmen is literally running around inside her apartment, and the girl is doing her homework alone, but she keeps looking at her mum with concern." Robert closed his eyes. The picture was all too clear. Carmen was at the absolute limit of her strength, trying to be a mother, a worker, a homemaker, all by herself, with no support system, no help, no rest. "There's one more thing," Bruno continued. "Carmen is holding a letter. Looks official. She read it and threw it in a drawer, but her expression, she got even paler, if that's possible." At 7 in the evening, Carmen finally stopped moving. She sat down next to her daughter for dinner, plain rice, beans, and 2 hot dogs split in half. Bruno watched as Carmen pretended to eat, but was actually giving most of her portion to her daughter. "The girl is asking Carmen something," Bruno reported. "Carmen is shaking her head. Now she's smiling, but it's a forced smile. She's lying to her daughter about something." After dinner, Carmen helped her daughter take a bath in a tiny bathroom, carefully brushed her curly hair, and put her to bed with a story told from memory. Bruno watched as she kissed the girl's forehead repeatedly, as if trying to commit that moment to memory forever. When her daughter finally fell asleep, Carmen allowed herself to break down. She sat at the kitchen table, took the letter she had hidden in the drawer and read it again. Her hands trembled so much that the paper shook visibly. "She's crying, boss. Crying silently, with her hands covering her face. And she's staring at the letter like it's a prison sentence. Robert felt something twist in his stomach. "Bruno, I need you to try and find out what's in that letter." "How?" "I don't know. Figure it out." Bruno waited until Carmen composed herself and put the letter away again. When she went to the bathroom, he quietly approached the kitchen window. The drawer was slightly ajar and he could see part of the document's header. "Boss, it's an eviction notice. Carmen has 15 days to leave the apartment." The silence on the line was absolute. Robert felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. "There's more," Bruno continued in a grim voice. "There are other bills scattered on the table, all past due. It looks like Carmen owes a lot more than she can pay." Robert hung up the phone and stood in the middle of his luxurious mansion, surrounded by expensive furniture and impeccable decor. The contrast with what he had just discovered was almost obscene. Carmen was desperate not just because she was losing her daughter's caregiver. She was desperate because she was losing absolutely everything. And tomorrow she would come to work as always, pretending that everything was fine, hiding her despair behind forced smiles and professional efficiency. For the first time in his life, Robert Anderson felt small in the face of a situation that all his money couldn't explain. How could someone carry so much weight alone and still keep standing, smiling, working, caring? The answer came like a punch. She couldn't anymore. Carmen was breaking down, and he had been too blind to see it until now. Carmen arrived the next morning 15 minutes late, something completely unheard of in 5 years of work. Robert watched from the window as she practically flew across the garden, her hair disheveled and her uniform wrinkled as if she had slept in it. When she came through the service door, Robert could see her face for the first time since the previous night's discovery. What he saw shocked him deeply. Carmen looked like she had aged 10 years in a single night. Her eyes were swollen and red. There were deep dark circles under them, and her hands trembled visibly as she tried to organize the cleaning supplies. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson," she said in a hoarse voice, avoiding his gaze. "Sorry for the delay. It won't happen again." The desperate formality in her voice broke Robert's heart. Carmen was apologizing for 15 minutes as if it were a capital crime, when in reality she was fighting to keep her head above water in a storm he couldn't even imagine. "Carmen, are you okay?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She froze in the middle of reaching for a cleaning cloth, and for a moment Robert thought she would collapse right there. Her shoulders trembled, her lips moved as if to say something, but then she composed herself with a visible effort. "I'm fine, sir, just a little tired." A lie. Robert knew it was a lie, but he also knew that pressing her would only make Carmen shut down even more. He decided to watch silently as she worked, noticing every detail he had previously ignored. Carmen moved through the house like a robot with a low battery. Her usual tasks, which she normally performed with automatic efficiency, now seemed to require immense conscious effort. She wiped the living room table 3 times because she forgot she had already done it. She tried to vacuum the rug without plugging in the vacuum cleaner. She spent 5 minutes looking for a cleaning product that was in her hand. Her phone rang at 10:30, and Robert saw Carmen practically run to answer it, a look of desperate hope on her face. "Hello, Mrs. Margaret?" Her voice came out as a clear plea. "Did you change your mind about watching Isabella?" Robert heard fragments of the conversation on the other end, a female voice talking about too much responsibility and "I can't commit." Carmen tried to negotiate, offering more money she clearly didn't have, promising flexibility she couldn't afford to give. "Please, it's just until I find someone else. Yes, I understand $50 is not much, but it's what I can pay right now, and no, it's not just for a week." The conversation ended with Carmen listening to a dial tone, the third person to refuse to watch Isabella in 2 days. She put her phone away and leaned against the kitchen wall, closing her eyes, as if trying to find strength she no longer had. Robert approached quietly and found her whispering a desperate prayer. "Oh God, please help me. I don't know what to do anymore. I can't lose my daughter." The last phrase hit him like a slap. Lose her daughter? What was Carmen talking about? During lunch, Robert couldn't focus on anything. He called Bruno, but he didn't even know what to ask. The situation was becoming more complex and painful with every revelation. "Boss, can I suggest something?" Bruno said, after Robert explained Carmen's behavior that morning. "Go ahead." "How about you talk to her directly? It's obvious she's in trouble. Maybe it's time to stop observing and offer help." "She'll lie. She'll say everything's fine." "Then maybe it's time to admit you know the truth." The idea terrified Robert. How would he explain that he'd had her followed? How would he justify the invasion of privacy? But at the same time, watching Carmen slowly fall apart in front of him was becoming unbearable. In the afternoon, Carmen received a call that changed everything. Robert was in his office when he heard a muffled exclamation from the kitchen, followed by the sound of something shattering on the floor. He ran to see what had happened and found Carmen kneeling amidst the shards of a broken glass, holding the phone with hands that were shaking uncontrollably. "Carmen? What happened?" She looked up at him, and Robert saw pure panic in her eyes. "Mr. Anderson, I have to go now. It's an emergency." "What kind of emergency?" Carmen tried to stand up, cut her foot on a piece of glass, and didn't even notice she was bleeding. "The school, they called Isabella. She got sick and—" The words tumbled out, disconnected, mixed with sobs Carmen was trying to control. Robert had never seen her in a state of total panic. "Carmen, calm down. What happened to Isabella?" His daughter's name came out naturally, and Carmen looked at him with surprise for a second, before despair took over again. "She fainted at school. They took her to the community health clinic, but they said I need to go get her now, that they can't keep a child there without a guardian." Robert made an instant decision. "I'll take you." "You don't have to." "Carmen, you're shaking so much you can barely stand. How are you going to get there alone?" She tried to protest, but when she tried to walk on her cut foot, she nearly fell. Robert held her by the arm and guided her to the car, accepting no arguments. During the drive to the South Bronx, Carmen held onto the seat trying to calm down, but Robert could hear her whispering desperate prayers. "Please let her be okay. I can't lose her. She's all I have." "Carmen," he said softly, "your daughter is going to be fine." "You don't understand," she replied in a broken voice. "Isabella hasn't been eating well. I've been trying to stretch the food, but it's not enough. If she fainted from hunger—" The confession came out like a knife to Robert's chest. Carmen was literally starving herself to feed her daughter, and even then she wasn't managing to give the child what she needed. "How long have you two been struggling for food?" Carmen closed her eyes as if admitting the truth was a betrayal of herself. 3 weeks, since the rent was late and I had to choose between paying for the apartment or buying enough food." The silence in the car grew heavy. Robert drove on autopilot while he processed the information. 3 weeks. Carmen had been coming to his house, cleaning everything perfectly, pretending everything was fine, while her daughter was going hungry. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked in a choked voice. "What for?" Carmen replied with a bitterness he had never heard. "So, you could fire me for being a problematic mother? So you could give me a handout? I work, Mr. Anderson. I earn my money honestly. The problem is, it's not enough." They arrived at the community health clinic, a small, overcrowded building where Carmen had to wait in line for 40 minutes just to find out where her daughter was. When they finally got to Isabella, the girl was sitting on an examination table, pale and too small for her 7 years. "Mommy!" she cried when she saw Carmen, and threw herself into her arms with a heart-wrenching relief. Robert watched the reunion from a distance, seeing how Carmen obsessively checked if her daughter was okay, how she kissed the girl's face over and over, how her tears finally fell freely. The doctor, a young man with a tired expression, pulled Carmen aside for a private conversation. Robert couldn't hear everything, but he caught fragments that shocked him. Mild malnutrition, needs to eat better, recommend follow-up. Carmen nodded to everything, promising things she clearly didn't know how to deliver. When the doctor walked away, she returned to Isabella with a forced smile that fooled no one. "Let's go home, sweetie," she said, carrying her daughter in her arms as if she were a baby. On the way back, Isabella fell asleep in the back seat of the car, and Carmen finally allowed her despair to show. "Mr. Anderson," she whispered, I'm going to lose her." "What are you talking about?" "If Child Protective Services finds out I can't feed my daughter properly, they'll take her away from me. They'll say I'm an unfit mother." The final revelation hit Robert like a lightning bolt. That's what Carmen meant by losing her daughter. She wasn't just fighting against hunger, eviction, and the lack of a caregiver. She was fighting to keep her daughter, terrified that her poverty would be interpreted as neglect. "Carmen," he said, stopping the car in front of her apartment building, "that's not going to happen." She looked at him with tear-filled eyes and a deep bitterness. "How can you be so sure? You live in a different world than I do. In my world, being poor is a crime, and I'm losing this fight." Carmen got out of the car carrying Isabella, who was still asleep, and disappeared through the door of the simple building. Robert just sat, there in the middle of that unpaved street, surrounded by a reality his wealth had never allowed him to see. When he got home, the mansion had never seemed so empty and meaningless. He had discovered that his most trusted employee was literally starving with her daughter, and the only thing he could think of was a question that tormented him. How many other Carmens were there in the world, suffering in silence, too proud to ask for help, too invisible to be noticed? And more importantly, what could he do to let Carmen know she wasn't alone in this fight? Carmen didn't show up for work the next day. Robert waited until 9 in the morning, then 10, and when the clock hand passed 11, a deep unease took hold of him. In 5 years, Carmen had never missed a day without calling. In fact, she had never missed a day at all. He tried calling her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried again every hour, with the same result. By the afternoon, his concern had turned into real anguish. "Bruno," he called on the intercom, "I need you to go to Carmen's place. Something is wrong." An hour later, Bruno called back with information that made Robert's stomach churn. "Boss, the situation is worse than we thought. The neighbors said there was a commotion last night. Carmen was evicted." "What do you mean, evicted?" "The landlord showed up with 2 guys and threw her and the girl out of the apartment. Their belongings are in an old van parked on the street. Carmen is sleeping in the van with her daughter." Robert felt like he'd been punched. "Where are they now?" "Still there. The van is parked in front of a bakery. Saw Carmen come out to buy something and boss, she looks like a ghost. She's unrecognizable." "I'm going there." "Are you sure? She might be embarrassed." "I don't care. I can't sit here knowing she's sleeping on the street with a 7-year-old child." The drive to the South Bronx had never seemed so long. Robert tried to imagine what he would say when he found her, how he would explain his presence there, but his mind was blank. The only thing he could think of was the image of Isabella fainting from hunger the day before. When he arrived, at the location Bruno had described, it took him a few seconds to recognize the old rusty van as the new home of Carmen and Isabella. The vehicle was parked on a busy street, surrounded by the typical chaos of the outer boroughs: street vendors, loud music, kids running between cars. Carmen was sitting on the curb next to the van, holding Isabella in her lap. Even from a distance, Robert could see she had been crying a lot. Her eyes were so swollen she could barely open them, and her face had a sickly pallor that frightened him. Isabella seemed listless, leaning against her mother's shoulder as if she didn't have the strength to hold her head up. They both looked like faded versions of themselves, as if life were being slowly drained from their bodies. When Carmen saw him approaching, her first reaction was pure panic. She stood up quickly, nearly dropping Isabella, and tried to position herself to block his view of the van. "Mr. Anderson, what? How did you—" she stammered, running her hands through her messy hair in a desperate attempt to tidy herself up. "Carmen, I was worried when you didn't show up for work. I was going to call, I swear I was. It's just that my phone, the battery died and—" The words tumbled out, incoherent, as Carmen tried to invent explanations for the inexplicable. Robert looked at the van, where he could see a few belongings thrown in disarray: wrinkled clothes, some schoolbooks, a small pot, a thin blanket. It was their entire life reduced to objects that fit in a cramped vehicle. "Carmen," he said softly, "what happened?" The simple question broke the barrier Carmen had built. Her eyes filled with tears she could no longer hold back, and her voice came out as a broken whisper. They kicked me out. They said I was 3 months behind, that they couldn't wait any longer. They took our things and put everything out here." "Where did you sleep?" Carmen pointed to the van with an ashamed gesture. "In there, the bakery owner lent me a blanket. Isabella slept in my lap all night." The image of the two of them spending the night in a cramped vehicle, without heat, without a bathroom, without security, made Robert feel an inexplicable rage. Rage at himself for not noticing sooner, rage at the system. That allowed this to happen. Rage at his own powerlessness in the face of the situation. "And tonight? What's the plan for tonight?" Carmen lowered her eyes, clearly without an answer. "I don't know. I was thinking, maybe look for a shelter or—" "Mommy," Isabella murmured in a weak voice. "I'm thirsty." Carmen looked around desperately, as if water could materialize out of thin air. Robert realized she didn't even have the money to buy her daughter a cup of water. "I'll get her some water," he said, heading to the nearby bakery. "You don't have to, Mr. Anderson. Carmen, stop, just stop." He returned with a bottle of water and a sweet roll, which he offered to Isabella. The girl looked at her mother for permission before accepting, and when Carmen nodded, she devoured the snack as if she hadn't eaten in days. "When was the last time she ate something substantial?" Robert asked, watching as Isabella chewed slowly, trying to make the roll last as long as possible. "Yesterday morning. I managed to buy a roll. I split it with her." "And you?" Carmen looked away. "I wasn't hungry." An obvious lie. Robert could see in her eyes the hunger she was trying to hide, the way she watched Isabella eat with an expression of someone who wished they were doing the same. "Carmen, I need to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer. Why didn't you tell me about your situation?" She looked up at him, and Robert saw a mixture of shame, wounded pride, and total exhaustion. "Because you would have fired me," she answered, with brutal simplicity. "Bosses don't like employees with problems, especially problems with kids." "Who told you that?" "Life told me. I worked in 5 houses before yours. Whenever they found out I had a daughter, they'd find a reason to let me go. Can't work overtime, will miss work when the kid gets sick, doesn't have full concentration on the job." Always the same story. The revelation hit Robert like a slap. Carmen had hidden Isabella not out of shame for her daughter, but because of past traumatic experiences that had taught her that being a mother and an employee were incompatible in the world she lived in. "That's why you never said anything. Not in the 5 years you worked for me." "In the 5 years? I worked for you. I lived in fear that you would find out. Every day was another lie, but it was the price to keep the job that supported us." Isabella finished the roll and snuggled back into her mother's lap. Robert watched how the girl seemed smaller than she really was, how her eyes had lost the typical sparkle of children, how she clung to Carmen as if she were her only anchor in a world that had become too hostile. "Carmen," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, "you can't sleep on the street another night." "We have no choice." "Yes, you do. Come with me." Carmen looked up quickly. "Where?" "Home. You can stay in the staff room until—" "No." The answer came out firm, surprising Robert. "I'm not taking charity. I'm not going to become your pity project." "It's not charity, Carmen. It's what? Kindness? Compassion? I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson, but I still have my dignity. Not much, but I still have it." The wounded pride in Carmen's voice was almost tangible. Robert understood that he had touched a deep wound, that his offer of help had sounded like humiliation to her. "So what are you going to do?" Carmen looked around at the van, at her daughter in her arms, at the street full of strangers passing by without a glance. For a moment, her face showed the total desperation of someone who had reached the end of the line. "I'll figure something out," she whispered, but her voice trembled in a way that made it clear she had no idea how. At that moment, Carmen's phone rang. She answered it with hope, thinking it might be an offer for extra work or a place to stay. But as the conversation went on, her expression changed from hope to confusion, then to absolute horror. "What? No, there must be some mistake. What do you mean, at the school? But she's right here with me." Carmen looked at Isabella, then at the phone, then at Robert, with a look of panic he had never seen before. "Mr. Anderson," she whispered, covering the phone, "they're saying someone called Child Protective Services, that they received a report that I'm neglecting Isabella. They want to see us tomorrow morning at the school for an evaluation." Robert's blood ran cold. Someone had seen Carmen and Isabella on the street and interpreted the situation as neglect. Carmen's worst fear was coming true. She could lose her daughter not for being a bad mother, but for being a poor one. "Carmen, listen." But she had already hung up the phone and was looking at him with eyes that had lost all trace of hope. "They're going to take her from me," she said in a dead voice. "They're going to say I'm not fit to raise a child, and they're going to take her from me." Isabella, sensing her mother's despair, began to cry softly. And there, in the middle of that noisy street, Robert witnessed the moment Carmen finally broke completely. The meeting was scheduled for 8 in the morning at PS 152. Carmen spent the entire night awake inside the van, holding Isabella, who slept restlessly in her arms. Every hour that passed on the dashboard clock was torture, every minute bringing her closer to the moment she could lose her daughter forever. Robert had insisted she accept help, but Carmen remained firm in her refusal. "If they find out I need charity from my boss, it will be even worse," she had said with a painful logic he couldn't argue with. At 7 in the morning, Carmen woke Isabella with extreme care, as if the girl were made of crystal. She had managed to borrow a bucket of water from the bakery to give her daughter a makeshift bath inside the van, and she chose the least wrinkled outfit she could find among their disheveled belongings. "Mommy, why are we going to school so early?" Isabella asked, as Carmen tried to arrange her curly hair with her fingers, since they had lost the brush in the eviction. "We're going to talk to some people, sweetie. Important people, who want to know how we're doing." Isabella furrowed her little brow. "We're okay, aren't we, Mummy?" The innocent question broke something inside Carmen. How could she explain to a 7-year-old that they were not okay, that they had never been worse, that everything was falling apart around them? "Of course we're okay, Princess. We're very strong, you and I." But as she said it, Carmen looked around the van that had become her home, smelled the sour scent of their dirty clothes, noticed how Isabella seemed far too fragile, and knew she was lying. They were not okay. They were shattered. When they arrived at the school, 2 middle-aged women were waiting at the entrance. One of them carried a thick folder and wore small glasses that made her eyes look severe. The other had a slightly softer expression, but still formal and distant. "Mrs. Carmen Santos," the first woman approached. "I'm Dr. Regina Peterson from Child Protective Services, and this is my colleague, Dr. Marcia Shaw. We need to speak with you." Carmen squeezed Isabella's hand tightly, trying to control the trembling in her own. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" "We received an anonymous tip that the child is in a situation of social vulnerability. We need to conduct an evaluation." The words fell on Carmen like stones. Anonymous tip. Someone had looked at her situation and decided she was an unfit mother. Someone had judged her poverty as neglect. "Can we speak somewhere more private?" Dr. Peterson looked around the school entrance where some children were already starting to arrive. The school principal, a grey-haired woman named Mrs. Edwards, offered her office for the meeting. Carmen entered the familiar room holding Isabella, but everything felt different now, threatening, as if even this familiar space had turned against them. "Isabella, how about you play over there in the corner while we talk with your mum?" Dr. Shaw said in a voice that was too sweet, pointing to an area with some toys. Carmen hesitated to let go of her daughter's hand, as if it were the first step to losing her for good. But Isabella obediently went to the corner, picking up an old doll and pretending not to pay attention to the adults' conversation. "Mrs. Santos," Dr. Peterson opened the folder and took out some papers. "The report we received alleges that the child is living in inadequate conditions without a fixed residence and possibly lacking basic necessities." "That's not true," Carmen burst out, but immediately lowered her voice when she saw Isabella look in their direction. "I mean, we're going through some temporary difficulties, but I take very good care of my daughter. We understand that difficulties happen," Dr. Shaw said in a conciliatory tone, "but we need to assess whether Isabella is receiving adequate care. Where are you currently living?" Carmen felt her throat go dry. How could she answer that question without incriminating herself? How could she explain they were sleeping in a van without sounding like an irresponsible mother? We're staying temporarily with a friend, she lied, hating every word that came out of her mouth. What is this friend's address? Dr. Peterson asked, pen ready to write. Carmen made up an address, knowing they would probably check. Another lie to add to the pile that was growing around her, burying her deeper and deeper. And what about food? Has Isabella been having regular meals? Of course, Carmen answered too quickly. She eats very well, breakfast, lunch, dinner. Dr. Peterson made some notes while watching Carmen closely. Her trained eyes noticed details Carmen tried to hide. The wrinkled clothes, the hair that hadn't been cut in months, the excessive pallor, the nervousness that bordered on panic. Isabella, Dr. Shaw addressed the girl, can you come here for a minute? Carmen felt her world collapse. They were going to question her daughter. A 7-year-old child would be asked about things she shouldn't even have to understand. Isabella approached timidly, clutching the doll to her chest. Dr. Shaw knelt down to be at her level, trying to seem friendly. Hi, Isabella, what a pretty doll. What's her name? She doesn't have a name, Isabella answered softly. She's borrowed. Carmen closed her eyes. Even in the simplest answers, their reality shone through. Isabella, can you tell me what you had for breakfast today? The innocent question made Carmen stop breathing. Isabella looked at her mother uncertainly before answering. I haven't had breakfast yet. Mommy said we would eat later. The truth. They had no money for breakfast, so Carmen had promised they would eat something after the meeting, without knowing how she would keep that promise. And last night, what did you have for dinner? Mommy said she wasn't hungry, so I ate. Her bread too. Every word from Isabella was like an involuntary confession. Carmen wanted to scream, to explain the context, to make the social workers understand that she was doing the best she could under the impossible circumstances she was in. And where did you sleep last night? In Mommy's new car, Isabella answered with heartbreaking innocence. It's small, but Mommy said it's just for a few days. Dr. Peterson and Dr. Shaw exchanged significant glances. Carmen saw in that exact moment when they decided she was an unfit mother. She saw when her poverty was interpreted as neglect, when her desperate lies were seen as dishonesty, when her love for her daughter was questioned because of her inability to provide. Mrs. Santos, Dr. Peterson said in a formal voice, based on this initial conversation and the information we've received, we will need to conduct a more in-depth assessment of the situation. For now, Isabella can remain in your care, but there will be follow-up visits. Carmen felt a momentary relief mixed with terror. They weren't taking Isabella immediately, but the threat still loomed over their heads. If we do not see significant improvements in your housing and financial situation within 15 days, Dr. Peterson continued, we will have to consider other alternatives to ensure the child's well-being. Other alternatives. Carmen knew exactly what that meant. 15 days to find a home, a better-paying job, financial stability she had tried to build for 5 years without success. 15 days to perform miracles or lose her daughter. Do you understand what we're saying? Dr. Shaw asked gently. Carmen nodded, but inside she was screaming. She understood perfectly. She had 2 weeks to stop being poor or she would lose the only thing that gave her life meaning. After the social workers left, Carmen sat in the principal's office with Isabella in her lap, hugging her daughter as if someone might snatch her away at any moment. Mommy, why are you crying? Isabella asked, wiping away a tear that was streaming down Carmen's face. They're happy tears, sweetie. Because I love you so much. Another lie. Carmen was crying from despair, from fear, from a helpless rage against a world that punished poverty as if it were a crime. She was crying because she had 15 days to achieve the impossible, and she had no idea where to begin. When they left the school, Carmen saw a familiar car parked across the street. Robert was there, leaning against the vehicle, clearly waiting. When their eyes met, he crossed the street toward them. How did it go? He asked, noticing Carmen's swollen face. I have 2 weeks, she answered in a dead voice. 2 weeks to become a different person or I lose my daughter. Robert looked at Isabella, who was playing distractedly with the borrowed doll, oblivious to the drama unfolding around her. An innocent child who could be separated from her mother, not for lack of love, but for lack of money. "Carmen," he said with a determination she had never heard in his voice, "that is not going to happen." "How can you be so sure?" Robert looked into her eyes, and Carmen saw something that surprised her. There was an iron resolve, a strength that seemed capable of moving mountains. "Because I won't let it." Robert couldn't sleep for the 3 nights that followed the meeting with Child Protective Services. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the look of despair on Carmen's face when she said, "2 weeks to become a different person." The phrase echoed in his mind like a prison sentence, counting down the days to a foretold catastrophe. Carmen hadn't returned to work. Robert knew she was spending every minute searching for impossible solutions. Apartments she couldn't afford, jobs with hours incompatible with caring for Isabella, favors from people who had already exhausted their own ability to help. On the 4th morning, he couldn't stand the uncertainty any longer and decided to find her. He drove to the South Bronx with a knot in his stomach, expecting to find the van in the same place he had left it. But when he got there, the vehicle was gone. He asked the bakery owner, who recognized him from the last time. "Oh yeah, the lady with the little girl," the man said, shaking his head sadly. "She had to leave yesterday. The van broke down and got towed. I don't know where they went." Robert felt panic seize him. Carmen and Isabella were somewhere in the city without even the precarious shelter the van had offered. They had spent the whole day on the street, completely homeless, while the CPS deadline kept ticking. He spent the rest of the morning driving through the streets of the area, looking for Carmen in parks, at bus stops, in public shelters. The search was like looking for a needle in a haystack in a city of 8 million people. But he couldn't stop. It was Bruno who finally found her, almost by chance, late in the afternoon. He was passing near the Hunts Point bus terminal when he recognized Carmen's silhouette sitting on a bench, with Isabella lying in her lap. "Boss, I found them," Bruno reported over the phone. "They're at the bus terminal. Carmen looks like she's waiting for something or someone." Robert arrived at the terminal 20 minutes later, and what he saw completely destroyed him. Carmen was exactly where Bruno had described, but she looked like she had aged years in just a few days. Her hair was a mess, her clothes were dirty, and there was a look of defeat on her face he had never seen before. Isabella was sleeping soundly in her lap, but even in sleep, she seemed restless, constantly shifting as if having nightmares. The 2 of them were surrounded by 2 plastic bags that held all their belongings. When Carmen saw him approaching, her first reaction was pure shame. She tried to wake Isabella and stand up as if to run away, but she had nowhere to go. "Mr. Anderson, we were just—" "It was only temporary," she stammered, trying to invent explanations for a situation that had no explanation. "Carmen, where did you sleep last night?" She lowered her eyes, unable to lie one more time. "Here, at the terminal. The security guard lets us, as long as we leave really early." The answer was like a punch to Robert's gut. Carmen had spent the night in a bus terminal with a 7-year-old child sleeping on a public bench, completely vulnerable to any danger the night might bring. And tonight? I was waiting for my sister to call back. She lives in Atlantic City. Maybe she can take us in for a few days. But from Carmen's tone, Robert could tell she didn't believe her own hope. It was the desperate plan of someone who was drowning and clinging to anything that might float. "Carmen, this has to stop. Come with me now." "Where?" "Home. To a safe place with a bed, food, a bathroom." "I already told you I'm not taking charity," she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. Carmen's resistance was crumbling along with her situation. "Then don't consider it charity. Consider it a job offer." Carmen looked up, confused. What kind of job offer? Robert had thought about it the whole way to the terminal. "A live-in housekeeper. You and Isabella live at the house, you manage the upkeep, I pay you a decent salary and provide housing. It's a professional relationship, not a favor." For a moment, he saw hope in Carmen's eyes, but then she shook her head no. "CPS won't believe that. They'll say it's a last-minute arrangement. that it's a show to impress them. She was right, and Robert knew it. Any sudden change in Carmen's situation would be viewed with suspicion by the social workers. They would conclude it was a temporary sham to keep Isabella. "So what are you going to do?" he asked, feeling his frustration grow. "Keep sleeping in bus terminals until they come to take your daughter?" Carmen closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, Robert saw tears she could no longer hold back. "Maybe that's for the best," she whispered. "Maybe Isabella deserves a family that can give her what I can't." The sentence hit Robert like a lightning bolt. Carmen was considering voluntarily giving up Isabella. The situation had become so desperate that she was contemplating handing over her daughter so the child could have a better life. "You can't be serious." "Look at us, Mr. Anderson." Carmen gestured to Isabella, who was sleeping in her arms, wearing dirty clothes, her face pale from malnutrition. "Is this a life for a child? Sleeping on the street, going hungry, living on the run? Isabella loves you, you're her mother. And as her mother, maybe my duty is to make sure she has a better life even if it's away from me." The sacrifice Carmen was contemplating was so profound and painful that Robert couldn't find the words to argue against it. She was willing to break her own heart to give her daughter a chance she couldn't provide herself. At that moment, Carmen's phone rang. She answered it expectantly, clearly hoping it was her sister with good news. But as the conversation went on, her expression changed from hope to resignation. "I understand, Marissa. No, you're right, and I can't ask that of you." Robert heard fragments of the conversation from the other side. "I have my own kids to worry about. Jose lost his job. It's not that I don't want to help, but—" Carmen hung up the phone and stared at the device as if it could provide answers that no human could. "Your sister can't take you in?" "She has 3 kids and her husband is unemployed. I can't show up there with Isabella and create more problems for them." Robert watched Carmen try to be understanding even in her own tragedy, worrying about others' problems when she herself was facing the worst moment of her life. "Carmen, listen," he began, but was interrupted by a commotion nearby. A group of security guards was approaching, clearly preparing to ask Carmen to leave the terminal. It was almost 8 at night, the time they started clearing out people trying to spend the night there. "Ma'am, you're going to have to leave," one of the men said in a firm but not hostile tone. "You can't stay here with the child overnight." Carmen stood up automatically, carrying a still sleepy Isabella and the 2 bags with their belongings. She didn't even try to argue or plead. She just accepted another closed door, another option that had vanished. "Where are you going now?" Robert asked, watching Carmen walk slowly toward the terminal exit. "I'll find somewhere. I always do." But for the first time, Carmen sounded like someone who had completely lost hope. Her voice was dead, her steps uncertain, her eyes empty of any expectation that things would get better. Robert followed them out to the street, where Carmen stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, looking around as if trying to decide which way to walk when all directions led to the same place. Nowhere. "Carmen, please." "Mr. Anderson?" she interrupted, turning to face him with a sudden determination that surprised him. "I need you to do me a favor." "Anything." When they take Isabella from me, can you make sure she goes to a good family? You have connections, influence. You can make sure my daughter doesn't just end up anywhere?" The question broke something fundamental inside Robert. Carmen was literally asking him to help give her own daughter away to strangers because she had concluded that it would be better than continuing to fight. "I'm not doing that," he said firmly. "I'm not going to help you give up." "Then you're condemning me to watch my daughter waste away with me." "I'm saying there are still other options." Carmen laughed with a bitterness that was painful to hear. "What options? I've tried everything. I've looked for a job, a home, for help. All I get are closed doors and people saying they're sorry but they can't do anything." Isabella stirred in her mother's arms, whispering something in her sleep. Carmen looked at her daughter with infinite tenderness, mixed with a pain so deep that Robert felt like crying. "I have 9 days," she murmured, 9 days to perform a miracle that 5 years couldn't. And it was in that moment, watching Carmen hug Isabella in the darkness of that street, completely helpless and without hope, that Robert made a decision that would change everything forever. "Carmen, I need to tell you something," Robert said in a firm voice, stopping in the middle of the sidewalk. Something that's going to change everything. Carmen looked at him with extreme exhaustion, as if she no longer had the energy to listen to empty promises or false hopes. Isabella continued to sleep in her arms, oblivious to the moment that would define her future. "Mr. Anderson, please don't make this any harder than it already is. I lied to you," he continued, ignoring her protest. "For 5 years I lied about who I really am." Carmen frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Robert took a deep breath, preparing to reveal something he had kept secret his entire adult life. "My real name isn't Robert Anderson. It's Robert Santos. And I know exactly what you're going through because I've been through it myself." The last name Santos made Carmen take a step back, as if she had heard something impossible. "Santos, like my last name." "Because we're brother and sister, Carmen." The world stopped. Carmen felt her legs give way and had to lean against the nearest lamppost to keep from falling. Isabella stirred in her arms, but didn't wake up. "That's impossible," she whispered. "My parents... I don't have any siblings. You're..." "I was adopted when I was 8, Robert said in a choked voice. "Your parents were our parents, Antonio Santos and Maria Santos. They died in a car accident when I was 7 and you were only 2. You don't remember me because you were too little." Carmen shook her head violently. "No, that can't be true. I grew up in an orphanage. I never knew about any family." "I went to the orphanage first, too, but a wealthy family adopted me 3 months later. The Andersons. They gave me an education, opportunities. They even changed my name to erase my poor past. I became Robert Anderson, and I deliberately forgot that I had a little sister named Carmen Santos." Tears began to stream down Carmen's face as fragments of long-buried memories started to surface. A small house. An older boy who sometimes played. With her, a vague feeling of not always being alone. "But how... why did you never..." "Because I was a coward," Robert admitted, his voice breaking. "When I started to succeed in business, when my life became comfortable, I wanted to forget where I came from. I hired a private investigator to find you 2 years ago, but when I found out you were my employee, I panicked." Carmen was trembling now, holding Isabella tightly as she tried to process the revelation that changed everything she believed about her life. "You knew who I was for 2 years and never said anything. I didn't know how to say it. How could I explain that I had abandoned you? How could I justify living in a mansion while my sister cleaned my house to survive?" Anger began to rise in Carmen's eyes, mixed with pain and confusion. "You watched me suffer for 2 years. You saw me struggle alone, hide my daughter, nearly lose everything, and you stayed silent. I tried to help in other ways. I gave you 2 raises without you asking. I always approved your days off when you made up excuses. I tried to make your life easier without revealing the truth." "But it wasn't enough," Carmen exploded, waking Isabella. "It wasn't even close to enough. I almost lost my daughter because you were ashamed to admit you have a poor sister." Isabella opened her eyes, startled by her mother's raised voice. "Mommy, why are you mad?" Carmen immediately lowered her voice, stroking her daughter's hair. "It's nothing, sweetie. Go back to sleep." But Isabella was awake now, looking curiously at Robert. "Who is he, Mommy? Why are you crying?" It was then that Robert knelt down to Isabella's level with tears in his eyes. "Hi, Isabella. I'm your mommy's brother." Isabella looked from Robert to Carmen with a confused expression. "Mommy has a brother." Carmen couldn't answer. She was battling conflicting emotions, anger at being abandoned, relief at discovering she wasn't completely alone in the world, fear that it was too late for anything to change. "Carmen," Robert said softly, "I know you have every right to hate me. I failed as a brother, as a human being. But now I want to fix this." "How?" "CPS is coming for Isabella in 8 days. How are you going to fix that?" "First, you're both going to live with me. Not as an employee and a boss, but as family. You're my sister, Isabella is my niece. Second, I'm going to hire the best lawyers to make sure no court takes Isabella from you. And third..." He paused, as if about to reveal something even more important. "Third, I'm transferring half of all my assets to you. not as a favor or charity, but as restitution for the years I should have been by your side." Carmen was speechless. The offer was so surreal, so impossible to process, that she couldn't form a response. Are you serious?" "Completely. I've already spoken to my lawyers today. The paperwork can be ready in 48 hours. You will never have to worry about money or housing or Isabella's future again." "But why now? Why only now are you—" "Because seeing you suffer the way I have these past few days made me realize that all the wealth in the world is worthless if I let my family live in poverty. Because Isabella almost fainted from hunger, and that's my fault too. Because you are the strongest person I know and you deserve so much more than the life you've been given." Isabella, who had been listening to bits of the conversation, tugged on Carmen's shirt. "Mommy, does this mean we don't have to sleep on the cold floor anymore?" Her daughter's innocent question broke down Carmen's last defenses. She looked at Robert, now seeing in him features she had subconsciously recognized all these years, without understanding why. "If I accept," she said slowly, "it's not because I need your money. It's because Isabella deserves to have a family. She deserves to have an uncle who cares about her. And she will," Robert promised. "You both will." 3 hours later, Carmen and Isabella were in a room in the Scarsdale mansion. Not the staff quarters, but the main guest suite with a king-size bed, a private bathroom, and a view of the garden. Isabella took her first hot shower in 2 weeks and put on clean clothes that Bruno had bought at a 24-hour store. "Mommy," Isabella said as Carmen tucked her into a real bed for the first time in days, "this place is like a castle." "It is, sweetie." "And is Uncle Robert a prince?" Carmen looked out the bedroom window where she could see Robert in the garden, on the phone with lawyers and social workers, arranging a complete overhaul of their lives in a matter of hours. "Yes, Isabella, I think he is." A week later, when the social workers from Child Protective Services arrived for the final evaluation, they found Carmen and Isabella in a completely transformed situation. Carmen had a formal job as an administrative supervisor at Robert's company, an upper-middle-class salary, stable housing, and most importantly, a solid family network. "This is a very sudden change," Dr. Peterson observed, reviewing the new documents. "Sometimes life changes fast," Carmen replied with a serenity she hadn't felt in years. "The important thing is that Isabella is safe, well-fed and loved." Isabella, who was now attending a private school near the mansion, was playing in the garden with Robert, who had discovered a talent for being an uncle. Their laughter echoed through the house, filling spaces that had been empty for far too long. "The child certainly seems well adjusted," Dr. Shaw admitted, watching through the window as Isabella chased soap bubbles that Robert was making. When the social workers left, officially closing the case with a positive evaluation, Carmen sat on the living room sofa and allowed herself to cry for the first time in weeks, but now they were tears of relief, not despair. "Thank you," she said when Robert came inside with Isabella, whose cheeks were flushed from running. "Thank you," he replied, "for giving me a second chance to be a brother and an uncle." Isabella threw herself into Carmen's lap, still breathless from playing. "Mommy, can I live here forever?" Carmen looked around the room, no longer seeing the house of a distant boss, but the home of a rebuilt family. "Yes, sweetie, we can stay here forever." And for the first time in her adult life, Carmen Santos truly believed that everything was going to be okay, because she had discovered that she had never really been alone in the world. She had just lost her brother along the way, but now they had found each other again, and this time they would never let go.